Samuel Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched three men on horseback coming up the dusty trail to his ranch. The summer sun was beating down hard on the Montana territory, and he could already tell this wasn't going to be a friendly visit. The men wore dark suits despite the heat, and their faces looked serious as stone. His 8-year-old son Tommy was playing with a wooden horse near the barn, completely unaware that their whole world might be about to change. Samuel's heart sank as he recognized the lead rider, Mr. Hartwell from the Cattleman's Bank. This was the moment he had been dreading for months. "Mr. Morrison," Hartwell called out as he dismounted his horse. His voice was cold and businesslike. "We need to talk." Samuel nodded and gestured toward the porch. "Come on up. Can I get you some water? It's a hot day for riding." "This isn't a social call," Hartwell replied, pulling out a leather folder from his saddlebag. "We're here about your debt." The word hit Samuel like a punch to the gut. Ever since his wife Margaret had gotten sick with consumption 6 months ago, the medical bills had been piling up like snow in a blizzard. Even after she passed away, the debts remained. Doctor visits, medicines from back east, special foods, everything they tried to save her had cost money he didn't have. "I know I'm behind on the payments," Samuel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But the cattle prices have been down, and with Margaret's medical bills—" "Mr. Morrison," Hartwell interrupted, opening his folder. "You owe this bank $3,000? That's more than most people see in 5 years." Samuel felt his legs go weak. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. His ranch was doing okay, but it wasn't making that kind of money. Most months, he barely had enough to buy supplies and pay his 2 ranch hands. "I can pay a little each month," Samuel offered desperately. "The ranch is starting to do better. Next year's calves should bring in good money." Hartwell shook his head. "The bank has been patient, Mr. Morrison, too patient. We have our own debts to pay." One of the other men, a thin fellow with a pencil mustache, stepped forward. "The bank is prepared to foreclose on this property. All 2,000 acres, the house, the barn, everything." Samuel's world started spinning. This ranch had been in his family for 15 years. His father had helped him build the house where Tommy was born. Every fence post, every water trough, every tree planted around the house held memories of his life with Margaret. "There has to be another way," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Hartwell pulled out a piece of paper. "There's one possibility. If you can come up with the full $3,000 in 30 days, or ... or what? Or if you can, prove you have additional income coming in. A business partner, or ... quos." Hartwell paused and looked at Samuel meaningfully. "A marriage that would bring assets or earning potential to the household." Samuel almost laughed, but it would have been a bitter sound. "Marriage? Mr. Hartwell, my wife has been gone 6 months. I'm not exactly in a position to go courting. Nevertheless, those are your options. 30 days, Mr. Morrison. Find the money or find a wife who can help you pay it. Otherwise, this ranch gets sold at auction." The banker handed Samuel a document. "Sign here to acknowledge the debt and the terms." Samuel's hand shook as he took the pen. His signature looked like a child had written it. As he handed the paper back, he caught sight of Tommy still playing by the barn. The boy had no idea that he might lose the only home he'd ever known. After the men rode away, Samuel sat on his porch steps with his head in his hands. $3,000. He did some quick math in his head. Even if he sold every cow on the ranch, he might get $2,000 if he was lucky. His savings account had exactly $47 in it. As for marriage, that seemed even more impossible than finding the money. There were maybe a dozen unmarried women in the whole territory, and most of them were either too young or already being courted by men with better prospects. Besides, what woman would want to marry a widower with debts and a child? Tommy ran up to the porch, his face dirty and happy. "Papa, who were those men?" Samuel forced a smile. "Just some business folks, son." "Nothing for you to worry about." But inside, Samuel was worrying enough for both of them. He had 30 days to save everything he'd worked for, everything his family had built. 30 days to find a miracle. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Samuel sat at his kitchen table with a pencil and paper, trying to figure out any possible solution. He wrote down the names of every person he knew who might lend him money. He crossed them all out. He wrote down possible ways to make money fast. He crossed those out too. By midnight, he was staring at a blank piece of paper and an impossible situation. Outside, the wind was picking up, and he could hear the cattle moving restlessly in the distance. This land, this life, this future for his son, it was all slipping away, and he couldn't see any way to stop it. Samuel blew out the oil lamp and headed to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he lay awake listening to the night sounds of his ranch and wondering if these were some of the last nights he'd ever hear them. Elena Vasquez was scrubbing the wooden floor behind the counter when she heard Mrs. Hutchins talking to a customer about the Morrison ranch. Elena kept her head down and continued working, but her ears picked up every word. In her 3 years working at the general store, she had learned that people often forgot she was there. "Poor Samuel Morrison," Mrs. Hutchins was saying as she weighed out flour for another customer. "That man's about to lose everything. The bank wants $3,000 or a wife, and Lord knows he's not likely to find either one." Elena's hands paused on the scrub brush. She knew Samuel Morrison. He came into the store every 2 weeks with his little boy to buy supplies. Unlike most of the men in town, he always said please and thank you to her. He made sure his son did the same. When other customers treated her like she was invisible, Samuel would nod politely and sometimes even ask how she was doing. "What's he gonna do?" the customer asked. "Don't rightly know. 30 days isn't much time to work miracles." After the customer left, Elena finished her scrubbing and moved to organizing the shelves. But her mind wasn't on her work. She was thinking about Samuel Morrison and his problem, and about her own situation. Elena was 22 years old, though she looked younger. She had come to Montana Territory 3 years ago from New Mexico after her father died owing money to some very dangerous men. The debt collectors had given her a choice: work off the debt or face the consequences. Mrs. Hutchins had agreed to take on Elena's father's gambling debts in exchange for 4 years of work. Legally, Elena was considered Mrs. Hutchins' property until those debts were paid. She couldn't leave, couldn't get married, couldn't even keep any money she might earn. She had 1 more year left on her contract, but she had been starting to wonder if Mrs. Hutchins might find ways to extend it. That evening, Elena lay on her narrow cot in the small room behind the store. The walls were thin, and she could hear Mrs. Hutchins and her husband talking in the next room. "That Mexican girl's been here 3 years now," Mr. Hutchins was saying. "Debt should be nearly paid off." "I've been thinking about that," Mrs. Hutchins replied. "She's been mighty useful. Good worker, doesn't complain. Maybe I calculated wrong about how much her father owed." Elena's heart sank. She had suspected this might happen. Mrs. Hutchins could claim the debt was larger than originally stated, and Elena would have no way to prove otherwise. She couldn't even read the English contract she had signed, but as she lay there thinking, an idea began to form in her mind. It was crazy, probably impossible, but it might solve both her problem and Samuel Morrison's. The next morning, Elena waited until the store was quiet. Mrs. Hutchins was in the back room doing inventory, and there were no customers around. Elena had been practicing what she wanted to say, trying to get the English words right. When Samuel came in with Tommy to buy supplies, Elena made her move. As he was loading his purchases into his wagon outside, she followed him. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, her accent thick but her words careful, "I need to speak with you." Samuel looked surprised. In 3 years, Elena had never initiated a conversation with him. "Of course. What can I do for you?" Elena glanced around to make sure no one could hear them. "I hear about your problem with the bank." Samuel's face darkened. "Word travels fast in a small town." "I have idea," Elena said, her heart pounding. "Maybe we can help each other." "I don't understand." Elena took a deep breath. "You need wife to keep ranch. I need freedom from Mrs. Hutchins. Maybe we make agreement." Samuel stared at her like she had just suggested they fly to the moon. Elena, that's very kind, but you don't understand. You're bound to Mrs. Hutchins, and besides, I couldn't ask you to. Is not kindness, Elena interrupted. Is business. You give me freedom. I help save ranch. I know about cattle, about land. My father had ranch in New Mexico before he died. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the idea. Elena, even if such a thing were possible, which I doubt it is, you deserve better than a marriage of convenience to a man with debts and problems. Elena looked him straight in the eye. Mr. Morrison, what I deserve and what I can get are different things. Right now, I am property. Mrs. Hutchins can keep me here as long as she wants, but married woman has rights. Has freedom. I need to think about this, Samuel said slowly. You have 28 days to think, Elena replied. But if you decide yes, you should talk to Judge Harrison. He knows about territorial laws. As Samuel drove away with Tommy, Elena watched the wagon disappear down the dusty street. She had just proposed marriage to a man she barely knew. It was the boldest thing she had ever done in her life, and possibly the most foolish that night. Mrs. Hutchins seemed to be watching Elena more closely than usual. You were talking to Samuel Morrison today, she said, as Elena swept the front of the store. He asked about the price of flour, Elena replied, not looking up from her sweeping. Seemed like a long conversation about flour. Elena just shrugged and continued sweeping, but inside her heart was racing. She had thrown her idea out into the world, and now all she could do was wait to see if Samuel Morrison was desperate enough to consider it. Back at the ranch, Samuel was having his own sleepless night. Elena's proposal kept running through his mind. It was impossible, wasn't it? A marriage between a struggling white rancher and a Mexican servant girl would cause talk all over the territory. But then again, losing his ranch would cause talk, too. More than that, though, Samuel found himself thinking about Elena herself. She was quiet and hardworking, always polite to Tommy. There was something in her eyes that suggested she was much smarter than people gave her credit for, and she had said she knew about cattle and land. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as impossible as it seemed. For 3 days, Samuel couldn't get Elena's proposal out of his head. Every time he looked at Tommy playing in the yard, every time he walked past Margaret's grave on the hill behind the house, every time he counted the few dollars in his money jar, he thought about what Elena had said. On the 4th day, he made a decision. He rode into town and went straight to Judge Harrison's office. The judge was a fair man who had been Samuel's friend since before Margaret died. Samuel, Judge Harrison said, looking up from his paperwork, what brings you to town on a Wednesday? Samuel took off his hat and sat down heavily in the chair across from the judge's desk. I need to ask you about something, and it's going to sound crazy. Try me, Samuel told the judge about Elena's proposal. Judge Harrison listened without interrupting, his eyebrows getting higher and higher as Samuel explained the situation. Well, the judge said when Samuel finished, that is indeed unusual, but not necessarily impossible. What do you mean? Judge Harrison pulled out a thick book of territorial laws. Indentured servants can be released from their contracts through marriage, assuming the debt is transferred to the husband. But once married, the woman becomes a free citizen with all the rights that entails. Samuel felt a spark of hope. So it could work? Legally, yes. But Samuel, you need to think about this carefully. Marriage is a serious commitment, even if it starts as a business arrangement. I've thought about little else for days. The judge flipped through more pages. There's something else you should know. I did some checking after you mentioned Elena's father. Pedro Vasquez owned a small piece of land in New Mexico before he died. It was never officially claimed by anyone after his death. Samuel leaned forward. What does that mean? It means Elena might have inheritance rights. The land isn't worth much, but there are some mining claims on it that could be valuable. If she's legally free to inherit, that property could provide additional income for your household. Samuel's heart started beating faster. This could actually solve his problems, not just postpone them. But, Judge Harrison continued, you need to be sure Elena understands what she's agreeing to. Marriage transfers her indenture to you, but it also gives her rights as your wife. You can't treat her like a servant. I wouldn't, Samuel said quickly. I'd treat her with respect. I believe you would. But what about the rest of the town? There will be talk, Samuel. A white rancher marrying a Mexican servant girl? Some people won't like it. Samuel thought about this. Some people already don't. Like me, because I can't pay my debts. At least this way, Tommy and I get to keep our home. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. If you both decide to go through with this, I can perform the ceremony. But I want to talk to Elena myself first, make sure she understands what she's agreeing to. That evening, Samuel rode to the general store. He waited until Mrs. Hutchins was busy with customers, then caught Elena's eye and nodded toward the back door. She understood and slipped out to meet him. I talked to the judge, Samuel said without any small talk. He says it's possible. Elena's eyes lit up. Really? But we need to talk about what this would mean for both of us. They found a quiet spot behind the building where no one could see them. Samuel explained what Judge Harrison had told him about the law and about her father's property. My father had land? Elena asked, her voice full of surprise. According to the judge, yes. It might not be worth much, but it could help. Elena was quiet for a moment. Mr. Morrison, I need to tell you something. I'm not as simple as people think. I can read and write in Spanish. I helped my father with his ranch before he started gambling. I know about cattle, about land management, about keeping books. Samuel was surprised. Why don't people know this? Because they do not ask. They see Mexican servant girl. They think that is all I am. I would want you to be a partner, Samuel said carefully, not just a wife on paper. If we do this, we do it as equals. Elena studied his face. You mean this? I do. But I want something from you too. What? I want you to teach me about the things you know, about land management, about your father's methods. And I want to learn Spanish, so I can teach Tommy. It might help him in the future. Elena smiled for the first time since Samuel had known her. Yes, I would like this. There's one more thing, Samuel said. I want you to know that this marriage would be real in the eyes of the law and the church, but I won't expect. That is, you would have your own room, your own space. I won't pressure you for anything you don't want to give. Elena nodded. You are a good man, Mr. Morrison. I think we can make this work. Call me Samuel. If we're going to be married, we should use first names. The next day, they both went to see Judge Harrison. The judge spent an hour talking to Elena alone, making sure she understood her rights and options. When he was satisfied that she was entering the agreement freely, he agreed to perform the ceremony. When? Samuel asked. The sooner the better. Elena said, Mrs. Hutchins is getting suspicious. Yesterday she asked me why I was smiling so much. They decided on the following Saturday, just 21 days before the bank's deadline. That would give them time to get the legal paperwork in order and for Elena to finish her current obligations at the store. As they walked out of the judge's office together, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in months, hope. It was a strange way to start a marriage, but maybe strange was exactly what he needed. Elena walked beside him, her head held higher than he had ever seen it. For the first time in 3 years, she was about to become a free woman. And maybe if they were both lucky, they might even become friends. Samuel, she said as they reached the general store. Yes? Thank you for seeing me as more than just a servant. Thank you for seeing me as more than just a desperate man. They shook hands like business partners, but there was something warmer in the gesture. Something that felt like the beginning of trust. The morning of the wedding, Samuel stood in front of his bedroom mirror trying to make his hair cooperate. His hands were shaking slightly as he adjusted his tie. It wasn't nervousness about marrying Elena exactly. They had talked enough over the past week to feel comfortable with their arrangement. It was the enormity of what they were doing that made his stomach flutter. Tommy bounced into the room, already dressed in his best clothes. Papa, is Elena really going to be my new mama? Samuel knelt down to his son's level. She's going to be my wife, which makes her your stepmother. But Tommy, this is different from when your mom and I got married. Elena and I are getting married to help each other like business partners. But I like Elena, Tommy said. She taught me how to say horse in Spanish. It's Caballo, Samuel smiled. She's a good person, son. I think you'll like having her around. Meanwhile, at the general store, Elena was getting ready in her small room. Mrs. Hutchins had been surprisingly supportive once she learned about the wedding plans. Maybe she realized that Elena's debt would be paid off either way, and this solution saved her from having to deal with Elena's contract ending. Here, Mrs. Hutchins said, entering the room with something white folded in her arms. I talked to Samuel yesterday. He asked if you could wear this. Elena unfolded the garment and gasped. It was Margaret's wedding dress, altered to fit Elena's smaller frame. He wants me to wear his first wife's dress? Elena asked, unsure if she should be honored or concerned. It was Tommy's idea, Mrs. Hutchins explained. The boy said his mama would have liked you to have it, Samuel agreed. Elena held up the dress. It was simple but beautiful, with small pearl buttons and delicate lace at the collar. Someone had spent considerable time adjusting it to fit her. Mrs. Hutchins, Elena said quietly. Thank you for everything. I know I was not easy servant. Sometimes, the older woman's stern expression softened. You were a good worker, Elena, better than you needed to be. I hope this new life treats you well. The wedding ceremony took place at the small Catholic mission on the edge of town. Father Miguel, who had known Elena's family in New Mexico, agreed to perform the service. Judge Harrison stood as witness. Along with Mrs. Hutchins and Tommy, Elena walked down the short aisle wearing Margaret's dress, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers that Tommy had picked that morning. Samuel waited at the front wearing his best suit and a nervous expression. Dearly beloved, Father Miguel began in accented English, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Samuel Morrison and Elena Vasquez in holy matrimony. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When it came time for vows, Samuel and Elena had agreed to speak from the heart rather than just repeat traditional words. Elena, Samuel said, his voice steady, I promise to treat you as an equal partner, to respect your opinions and your heritage, and to help you build the life you deserve. Elena's voice was clear and strong. Samuel, I promise to work beside you, to share my knowledge and my strength, and to help you and Tommy build a secure future. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel hesitated for just a moment before gently kissing Elena's cheek. It was their first physical contact beyond handshakes, and both of them blushed slightly. After the ceremony, the small group walked to the general store for a simple celebration. Mrs. Hutchins had prepared a modest cake, and Judge Harrison produced a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. To new beginnings, the judge toasted, raising his glass. To new beginnings, they all echoed. Later that afternoon, Samuel helped Elena load her few possessions into his wagon. She didn't have much, a small trunk with clothes, a Spanish Bible that had been her father's, and a wooden box containing letters and papers from her family. Tommy chattered excitedly during the ride to the ranch, pointing out landmarks and telling Elena about his favorite spots. That's where Papa and I go fishing, he said. And over there is where Mama is buried. Papa visits her every Sunday. Elena noticed Samuel's hands tighten on the reins when Tommy mentioned Margaret's grave, but he didn't say anything. When they arrived at the ranch house, Samuel showed Elena to a small bedroom that had once been a sewing room. I cleaned it out and put in a bed, he said. It's not much, but it's private. Elena looked around the simple room with its clean white walls and single window overlooking the pasture. It is perfect, she said. Much better than my room at the store. That evening, Elena cooked dinner for her new family. She made a simple stew, but she added spices and techniques from her homeland that transformed the basic ingredients into something special. This is really good, Tommy said, eating enthusiastically. What makes it taste different? Cumin, Elena explained. And a little bit of chili powder. Not too much for you. Samuel ate quietly, but Elena could tell he was surprised by how good the food was. After dinner, she shooed the men out of the kitchen and cleaned up, taking note of how the kitchen was organized and what supplies were available when the dishes were done. The three of them sat on the front porch as the sun set. Tommy fell asleep. In his chair, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "I'll carry him to bed," Samuel said softly, while he was putting Tommy to bed. Elena walked around the ranch yard, getting a feel for her new home. The barn was well maintained, and she could hear the cattle settling down for the night in the distance. It wasn't the largest ranch she'd ever seen, but it was clearly run with care. When Samuel came back outside, he found Elena examining the vegetable garden that had been neglected since Margaret's death. "I used to help Margaret with that," he said, "but I haven't had time to keep it up." "I can fix it," Elena said. "In New Mexico, we learned to grow things in difficult soil. This is good earth." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them processing the fact that they were now married, that this was now Elena's home too. "Samuel," Elena said finally, "I want you to know something. I understand that you loved your first wife very much. I'm not trying to replace her or make you forget her. I just want to help you and Tommy build a good life." Samuel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for understanding that, and Elena ... I want you to know that even though this marriage started as a business arrangement, I respect you, as a person, as a woman, as my wife. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something solid they could build on." As they went inside to their separate bedrooms, both of them felt that maybe, just maybe, they had made the right choice. 2 weeks after the wedding, Samuel realized that marrying Elena might have been the smartest decision he'd ever made. Even if he hadn't known it at the time, it started with small things. The coffee tasted better in the morning because Elena had figured out the right ratio of beans to water. The clothes came back from washing cleaner and dried faster because she had reorganized the whole laundry process. The vegetable garden, which had been a patch of weeds, was suddenly producing tomatoes, beans, and squash, but it was the bigger changes that really caught Samuel's attention. Elena had been watching how he ran the ranch for those first 2 weeks, saying little but observing everything. Then one morning at breakfast, she cleared her throat and said, "Samuel, I have some ideas. I'm listening." She pulled out a piece of paper where she had been making notes in careful English writing. Samuel was surprised again by how neat her handwriting was. "The water system," she began. "You are losing too much water in the summer. In New Mexico, my father taught me about irrigation channels and water conservation." She explained her ideas, while Tommy listened with wide eyes, impressed that his new stepmother knew so much about ranching. "Where did you learn all this?" Samuel asked. "My father had a ranch for 15 years before he started gambling. I worked with him every day until I was 17. I know cattle, I know land, I know water management." That afternoon, Elena showed Samuel how to dig shallow irrigation channels that would direct rainwater to where it was needed most. It was simple but effective, and Samuel kicked himself for not thinking of it earlier. "We should have talked about this weeks ago," he said, as they worked side by side in the dirt. "You did not ask," Elena replied. "Most people, they see Mexican woman, they think I only know how to cook and clean." The next week brought another test of Elena's skills. One of Samuel's cows was having difficulty giving birth, and the calf seemed to be stuck. Samuel was getting ready to ride to town for the veterinarian when Elena stopped him. "Wait," she said. "Let me try something first." She had Samuel hold a lantern while she examined the cow. Her hands were gentle but confident as she felt around and determined the calf's position. "The calf is turned wrong," she explained, "but I can fix this." Samuel watched in amazement as Elena carefully maneuvered the calf into the right position. It took almost an hour of patient work, but finally the calf slipped out, healthy and breathing. "How did you know how to do that?" Samuel asked as they watched the calf take its first wobbly steps. "My father taught me. He said a rancher who cannot help his own animals will not be a rancher for long." By the time autumn arrived, the ranch was running more smoothly than it had in years. Elena had introduced several techniques from her father's ranch that improved efficiency and saved money. She had also convinced Samuel to hire 2 Mexican ranch hands who were willing to work for lower wages than the local men. "They are good workers," she assured him, "and I can translate, make sure everyone understands what needs to be done." The new hands, Carlos and Miguel, were indeed excellent workers. More importantly, they brought knowledge of their own that complemented Elena's ideas about land management. During this time, Samuel kept his promise to learn Spanish. Every evening after dinner, Elena would spend an hour teaching him and Tommy basic phrases and vocabulary. Tommy was picking it up much faster than his father, and soon he was chattering with the Mexican ranch hands like he'd been bilingual all his life. "You are a good teacher," Samuel told Elena one evening as they practiced vocabulary words. "You are a good student," she replied. "Better than Tommy. He does not sit still long enough." Samuel laughed. "He gets that from his mother." Margaret was always moving, always busy with something. It was the first time Samuel had mentioned Margaret naturally in conversation, without the painful sadness that usually came when her name was brought up. Elena noticed this but didn't comment on it. As the ranch improved, so did Samuel's relationship with the bank. Mr. Hartwell's monthly visits became less tense as the books showed consistent profits and the debt payments were made on time. "I have to admit, Morrison," Hartwell said during his October visit, "I didn't think you'd be able to turn things around. But your wife seems to have been a good influence on the operation." "She's been a partner in every sense of the word," Samuel replied, and he meant it. But that same week, Elena received a letter that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in New Mexico, written in Spanish, regarding her father's estate. Elena read the letter twice before showing it to Samuel. "Can you read this?" she asked, her voice shaky. Samuel studied the Spanish text, picking out words he had learned. "I can understand some of it." "Something about your father's land?" Elena nodded. "The lawyer says my father's land claim has been validated. The property includes not just the ranch land, but also a small silver mine that my father never developed." Samuel felt his stomach drop. "What does that mean?" "It means I could inherit enough money to be independent. I could buy my own land, start my own life." That night, Samuel lay awake staring at the ceiling. Elena had married him to escape servitude and help him save his ranch. She had fulfilled her part of the bargain better than he could have hoped. The ranch was thriving, the debt was manageable, and Tommy had a stepmother who cared about him. If Elena inherited her father's property, she would have choices. She could leave Montana Territory, go back to New Mexico, start fresh somewhere else. She wouldn't need their marriage of convenience anymore. The thought of losing her surprised him with its intensity. Somewhere along the way, Elena had become more than just a business partner. She had become a friend, a collaborator, someone he looked forward to talking with every day. But more than that, Samuel was beginning to realize that he had feelings for Elena that went beyond gratitude and respect. He enjoyed her quick wit, her gentle way with Tommy, her quiet strength. He found himself looking forward to their evening Spanish lessons and their conversations about ranch management. The problem was, he had no idea how Elena felt about him. She was kind and friendly, but she had entered this marriage as a business arrangement. Nothing in their agreement had promised anything more than mutual respect and partnership. As Samuel finally drifted off to sleep, he wondered if Elena was lying awake too, thinking about the choices that her inheritance would give her. And he wondered if, when she made those choices, there would be any room in her plans for a Montana rancher and his 8-year-old son. Winter came early that year, and it came hard. By November, snow was already piling up around the ranch house, and the wind had a bite that warned of worse weather to come. Elena had been quiet since receiving the letter about her inheritance. She went about her daily work as usual, but Samuel could tell she was thinking deeply about something. They hadn't talked about the letter since that first night, but it hung between them like an unspoken question. Then, in early December, the blizzard hit. Samuel woke up one morning to find snow drifted halfway up the windows and wind howling like a living thing. When he tried to open the front door, it was blocked by a wall of snow. "Papa," Tommy called from his bedroom window, "I can't see the barn." Samuel looked out and realized the boy was right. The storm was so thick that everything beyond 20 feet was invisible. They were completely cut off from the outside world. "How much food do we have?" Samuel asked Elena as they assessed their situation. Elena had been keeping better track of supplies than he had. Enough for maybe 2 weeks if we are careful. There is beef in the cold cellar, and I canned vegetables from the garden. What about the cattle? Carlos and Miguel moved them to the shelter yesterday when they saw the storm coming. The animals should be safe, but someone needs to check on them every day. For the first 3 days of the storm, Samuel struggled through the snow to reach the barn and check on the livestock. But on the 4th day, he woke up with a fever and a cough that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "You are not going out today," Elena said firmly when she heard him coughing. "The animals need to be fed and watered," Samuel protested, but his voice was weak and hoarse. "I will do it." "Elena, you can't. The storm is too dangerous and the work is too heavy." Elena looked at him with the same determined expression he had seen the day she proposed their marriage. "Samuel, I grew up on a ranch. I know how to take care of cattle. And I am not made of glass." Before Samuel could argue further, Elena was pulling on her warmest clothes and boots. She wrapped a rope around her waist and tied the other end to the porch railing so she wouldn't get lost in the storm. Tommy helped by keeping the fire going and bringing his father hot tea with honey. "Elena is really brave, isn't she, Papa?" the boy said as they watched her disappear into the swirling snow. "Yes," Samuel admitted, "she really is." Elena was gone for what felt like hours. When she finally stumbled back through the door, she was covered in snow and ice, but her eyes were bright with accomplishment. "All animals are fine," she reported, pulling off her frozen gloves. "I gave them extra hay and broke the ice on their water." Carlos and Miguel did good job preparing for storm. Over the next week, as Samuel's fever worsened, Elena took complete charge of the ranch. She organized Tommy to help with indoor chores, managed the food supplies carefully, and made the dangerous trip to the barn twice a day to care for the livestock. Samuel was too sick to protest, or even to fully appreciate what she was doing. The fever made him delirious at times, and he drifted in and out of sleep while Elena sat beside his bed, cooling his forehead with damp cloths and making sure he drank enough water. "You are going to be fine," she told him during one of his lucid moments, "but you need to rest and let me take care of things." "Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "if something happens to me, promise me you'll take care of Tommy." "Nothing is going to happen to you," she said firmly. "And yes, I promise." It wasn't until much later that Samuel realized Elena had been keeping detailed notes about the ranch operations during his illness. She had recorded which cows needed special attention, how much feed was used each day, and what repairs would be needed when the weather cleared. When Samuel was finally well enough to get out of bed, he found that Elena had not only kept the ranch running but had actually improved some of the systems he had been struggling with for years. "How did you know to adjust the feeding schedule?" he asked, looking at her notes. "I watched the animals," Elena explained. "Some of them were getting too much food, some not enough, so I changed it to what each animal needed." "And this water system you set up in the barn?" "The old way was wasting too much time. This way, one person can water all the animals in half the time." Samuel shook his head in amazement. "Elena, you've been managing this ranch better than I was, and you were doing it in the middle of a blizzard while taking care of a sick man and an 8-year-old boy." Elena shrugged as if it was nothing special. "My father always said that a ranch does not stop running just because the rancher gets sick." As Samuel recovered his strength, he and Elena fell into new patterns of working together. She had proven that she could handle any aspect of ranch management, and he found himself consulting her on decisions he used to make alone. Their evening conversations also changed. Instead of just Spanish lessons, they talked about plans for the ranch, about Elena's childhood in New Mexico, about Tommy's future. Samuel found himself sharing stories about Margaret that didn't hurt to tell, memories that made him smile instead. "I feel sad. She would have liked you," he told Elena one evening as they sat by the fire. "Margaret always admired strong women." "I would have liked her too," Elena replied. "Any woman who could raise Tommy to be so kind and polite must have been special." It was during these long winter evenings that Samuel realized his feelings for Elena had grown beyond respect and friendship. He looked forward to their conversations, enjoyed her quick intelligence, and felt proud of her accomplishments. When she laughed at something Tommy said, or when she concentrated seriously on a problem, or when she looked out the window at the snow-covered landscape with a thoughtful expression, Samuel felt something warm and hopeful stirring in his chest, but he still didn't know how Elena felt about him. She was kind and friendly, but she had been that way from the beginning. She worked hard and contributed to the ranch, but that was part of their agreement. She cared for him when he was sick, but she would have done the same for anyone in need. The inheritance letter was still in Elena's trunk along with her father's papers. Samuel knew she was still thinking about it, still considering her options. And he couldn't bring himself to ask her what she was planning to do. One evening in late January, as they sat reviewing the ranch accounts together, Elena surprised him. "Samuel," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about the letter from New Mexico." Samuel's heart sank, but he kept his voice steady. "What have you decided?" "I have decided that I need to know more about what my father left me. I want to write to the lawyer and get more information." "That makes sense," Samuel said, though part of him wanted to discourage any contact with New Mexico. "But," Elena continued, "I also want you to know that whatever I inherit, whatever choices I have, I will not leave without discussing it with you first. We are partners now. Partners talk to each other before making big decisions." Samuel felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Thank you for that. This ranch, this life we are building together, it is important to me too," Elena said. "I am not. The same person who worked in the general store. This place has given me purpose, has let me use my skills. You and Tommy have become my family." Family. The word hung in the air between them, warm and significant. Samuel wanted to tell Elena how he felt about her, but he held back. She had said they were partners and family, but she hadn't said anything about love. Still, as winter began to slowly give way to early spring, Samuel felt more hopeful than he had in years. Whatever Elena decided about her inheritance, she wasn't planning to disappear without a word. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to see their marriage as something more than just a business arrangement. Spring arrived with a burst of activity that kept everyone on the ranch busy from dawn to dusk. The cattle needed to be moved to fresh pasture, fences needed repair after the harsh winter, and Elena's vegetable garden needed to be replanted and expanded, but it was also the season that brought news from the outside world. As travelers and mail carriers could finally get through the mountain passes again. In early March, Elena received a thick envelope from the lawyer in New Mexico. She read it carefully, her expression growing more serious with each page. "What does it say?" Samuel asked when she finished reading. Elena set the papers down on the kitchen table. "It is more than I expected, much more." She explained that her father's land included not just the ranch property but also mineral rights that had proven valuable. A mining company wanted to lease the land, and the payments would be enough to make Elena independently wealthy. "How wealthy?" Samuel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Enough to buy my own ranch. Enough to never worry about money again." That same week, Samuel received his own news from the bank. Mr. Hartwell rode out to the ranch with a smile on his face instead of his usual stern expression. "Morrison," he said, dismounting from his horse, "I have good news. The bank has reviewed your account and we're prepared to restructure your loan on very favorable terms." Samuel couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What does that mean?" "It means your debt payments will be cut in half and you'll have 10 years to pay off the balance instead of worrying about it all at once. The way this ranch has been performing over the past year, you're now considered a good risk." After Hartwell left, Samuel sat on his porch trying to process what had just happened. A year ago, he had been facing bankruptcy and the loss of everything he owned. Now, both he and Elena had financial security they had never dreamed of. The problem was, they had achieved this security separately. Elena's inheritance meant she didn't need their marriage for survival anymore. Samuel's improved relationship with the bank meant he didn't need her financial contribution to save the ranch. They both had choices now. Real choices. That evening, after Tommy went to bed, Samuel and Elena sat at the kitchen table with the legal papers spread between them. The inheritance documents, the new bank terms, and their original marriage certificate, all the pieces of their complicated situation laid out in black and white. "We need to talk about what happens next," Samuel said. Elena nodded. "Yes, we do." Before they could begin that conversation, Tommy came running into the kitchen in his nightshirt, tears streaming down his face. "Papa! Elena!" "There are men with torches outside." Samuel and Elena rushed to the window and saw a group of about 8 men on horseback in their front yard. They carried torches and rifles, and their faces were hard with anger. Samuel recognized the leader immediately, Jake Hartwell, the banker's oldest son, along with several other men from town who had never liked the idea of Samuel marrying a Mexican woman. "Morrison!" Jake Hartwell shouted. "Come out here, we need to talk." Samuel reached for his rifle, but Elena put her hand on his arm. "What do they want?" "Nothing good," Samuel replied grimly. He opened the front door, but stayed on the porch with Elena and Tommy behind him. "What can I do for you boys?" "We hear your wife came into some money," Jake said, his voice slurred with whiskey. "Convenient, isn't it? Marrying a servant girl who turns out to be rich?" "My wife's business is her own," Samuel replied evenly. "See?" "That's where you're wrong," another man called out. "We've been talking to folks, and they're saying this whole marriage was a sham. Just a way for a Mexican to get her hands on American money and land." Elena stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "I am American citizen now. I am married to American man." "You're a servant girl who got ideas above her station," Jake sneered. "And we think it's time you remembered your place." "That's enough," Samuel said, his voice sharp with anger. "You're on my land, threatening my family. I suggest you leave before I decide to defend my property." "Your property?" Jake laughed. "Which property would that be? The ranch that should have been foreclosed on, or the wife who should still be scrubbing floors?" Samuel felt his temper rising, but Elena squeezed his arm in warning. She was right. Getting into a fight with drunk men carrying guns would not end well, but Jake wasn't finished. "We know all about your little arrangement, Morrison. Marriage of convenience, they're calling it. Well, convenient marriages can be just as easily dissolved." "My marriage is real and legal," Samuel said. "Recognized by the territorial government and blessed by the church." "We'll see about that," Jake replied. "There are ways to deal with people who don't belong." The threat hung in the air like smoke from their torches. Samuel felt Elena tense beside him, and he could hear Tommy sniffling behind them. "You know what I think?" Samuel said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I think you're jealous. Jealous that my wife is smarter than any of you, braver than any of you, and more valuable to this community than all of you put together?" "Samuel," Elena whispered, "don't make them angrier." But Samuel was done being quiet about his feelings. "Elena came to this territory as a servant, but she's proven herself to be a better rancher than most of the men in this county. She saved my ranch, she's raised my son, and she's earned every bit of respect and success that comes her way." "You defending your property, Morrison?" Jake taunted. "No," Samuel said, his voice ringing with conviction. "I'm defending my wife, the woman I love." The words were out before Samuel realized he was going to say them. He felt Elena's sharp intake of breath beside him, but he didn't take the words back. "I love Elena Morrison," he continued, louder now. "I love her intelligence, her strength, her kindness, and her courage. Any man who has a problem with my wife has a problem with me." For a moment the confrontation hung in balance. Then one of the younger men in the group shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Come on, Jake," the young man said. "This isn't what we came here to do, yeah?" another voice added. "Let's just go home." Jake Hartwell glared at Samuel for a long moment, then spat in the dirt. "This isn't over, Morrison." "Yes, it is," Samuel replied firmly. "It's over because I'm not backing down, and neither is my wife." The group of men rode away, their torches disappearing into the darkness. Samuel, Elena, and Tommy stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. "Are they coming back, Papa?" Tommy asked in a small voice. No, son, Samuel said, though he wasn't entirely sure. They're just bullies who got scared when someone stood up to them. After they got Tommy settled back in bed, Samuel and Elena returned to the kitchen. The legal papers were still scattered on the table, but somehow they seemed less important now. Samuel, Elena said quietly, what you said out there about loving me ... I meant every word, Samuel replied without hesitation. I've been wanting to tell you for months, but I didn't know how you felt about me. Elena smiled, the first real smile Samuel had seen from her since the inheritance letter arrived. I have been afraid to hope that you could see me as more than just a business partner. Elena, you haven't been just a business partner for a long time. You're my wife, my friend, my partner, and everything that matters. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Then we should talk about our future. Our real future as people who choose to be together, not people who have to be together. As they talked late into the night, Samuel realized that the confrontation with Jake Hartwell's group had actually resolved something important. By publicly declaring his love for Elena, he had made it clear to everyone, including himself, that their marriage was real in every way that mattered. Whatever decisions they made about Elena's inheritance, whatever direction their lives took. From here, they would be making those decisions together, as partners who had chosen each other freely, and that, Samuel thought, was worth defending against all the Jake Hartwells in the world. 1 year later, Elena stood in the doorway of the new schoolhouse, watching as a dozen women of various ages and backgrounds worked carefully through their reading lesson. There were ranch wives, Mexican laborers' wives, and even 2 Native American women from the nearby reservation. All of them were learning to read English, and several were also teaching others to read Spanish. Very good, Mrs. Anderson, Elena said encouragingly as one of the older women sounded out a difficult word. Now try the next sentence. Elena had convinced the town council to build the schoolhouse 6 months earlier, arguing that educated women would make the whole community stronger. It had taken some persuasion, but when Elena offered to fund half the construction costs herself, the council had agreed. As the class ended and the women gathered their things to leave, Elena felt a familiar flutter in her belly. She placed her hand over her rounded stomach, where her and Samuel's child was growing strong. The baby was due in late summer, and Tommy was already excited about becoming a big brother. Mrs. Morrison, called one of the younger women as she headed toward the door. Will you be able to keep teaching when the baby comes? For a while, Elena replied. And after that, I'll train some of you to take over. This school should belong to all of us, not just to me. Elena locked up the schoolhouse and walked slowly back toward the ranch. The late afternoon sun was warm on her face, and she could see their cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. The ranch now covered nearly 3,000 acres, expanded with the money from Elena's inheritance in New Mexico, but more than the land had grown. The operation now employed 8 full-time workers, including Carlos and Miguel, who had become foremen. The ranch raised not only cattle but also horses, and Elena had started a small business breeding horses, using techniques her father had taught her. As Elena walked up the path to the house, she could hear laughter coming from the barn. She followed the sound and found Samuel and Tommy working together to train a young colt, with Tommy calling out instructions in Spanish and Samuel responding in the same language. Me bean, Papa, Tommy called out as Samuel successfully got the colt to walk in a circle. Now try to make him stop when you say alto. Samuel had become surprisingly good at Spanish over the past year, though his accent still made Elena smile. Tommy, now 9 years old, switched between languages so naturally that sometimes he forgot which one he was speaking. How was school today? Samuel asked Elena as he led the colt back to its stall. Good, Mrs. Peterson finished her first book, and the Rodriguez sisters are ready to start teaching the younger children. Samuel smiled with pride. The school had been Elena's idea, but it had become something the whole community valued. Even some of the men who had initially opposed Elena's presence in town now brought their wives to her classes. Speaking of education, Samuel said, I got a letter from the territorial governor's office today. Elena raised her eyebrows. What did the governor want? They're looking for people to serve on a committee about land rights and territorial development. Specifically, they want people who understand both American law and Mexican land traditions. Elena felt a thrill of excitement. They want you to serve? Actually, Samuel said with a grin, they want both of us. The letter specifically mentions Mr. and Mrs. Morrison and their expertise in cross-cultural ranch management. Elena couldn't help but laugh. A year ago, she had been considered property. Now, the territorial government wanted her advice on policy matters. That evening, after Tommy went to bed, Elena and Samuel sat on their porch swing, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. It had become their favorite time of day when they could talk quietly and plan for the future. I've been thinking about the governor's committee, Elena said, her head resting on Samuel's shoulder. And I think we should do it. Not just because it's an honor, but because we could help make things better for other families like ours. Samuel nodded. I was thinking the same thing. There are probably other people in situations like we were, people who could help each other if they just had the chance. Elena placed her hand over her stomach again. I want our children to grow up in a world where it doesn't matter if their mother was born in New Mexico or Montana, where people are judged by what they can do, not where they came from. Our children will grow up knowing they're loved and valued, Samuel said, covering her hand with his, just like Tommy has. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing softly in the distance, horses moving around in the corral, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees Samuel had planted around the house. Samuel, Elena said eventually, do you ever regret it? The way we got married, I mean, the fact that it wasn't for love at first? Samuel considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. I think we needed to learn to trust each other and work together before we could love each other. Maybe that made our love stronger, not weaker, Elena smiled in the darkness. I think you are right. We built something together before we fell in love with each other. Now our love is built on a foundation of respect and partnership. Besides, Samuel added with a chuckle, our marriage proposal was a lot more practical than most. You offered to help me save my ranch, and I offered to help you gain your freedom. We both kept our promises, and got more than we bargained for. Elena added. The next morning brought news that the territorial government had officially recognized Elena's school as a model for other communities. There was talk of state funding for similar programs throughout Montana Territory. This could help so many women, Elena told Samuel as they read the letter together. Women who want to learn, women who want to teach, women who just want a chance to prove what they can do. Samuel looked at his wife, brilliant, determined, 8 months pregnant, and still planning ways to help others, and felt his heart swell with pride and love. You know, he said, when I married you, I thought I was just saving my ranch. And when I married you, I thought I was just gaining my freedom, Elena replied. Instead, we found something neither of us was looking for. Elena smiled and kissed him gently. We found a real partnership, a real family, a real life. That afternoon, Elena went into labor earlier than expected. Samuel sent Tommy to fetch the doctor while he helped Elena get comfortable. By evening, their daughter was born healthy, loud, and beautiful. What should we name her? Samuel asked as he held the tiny baby. Elena looked at her husband. Her stepson, who was now sleeping, curled up in a chair by the window, and her newborn daughter, Hope, she said. We should name her Hope. Hope Morrison, Samuel said, testing the name. I like it. As the sun set over their ranch, their family, and their community, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had started as a servant girl called Property and had become a wife, mother, teacher, and respected member of the community. But more than that, she had become herself, the person she was always meant to be, just waiting for the opportunity to show it. Samuel looked at Elena holding their daughter, with Tommy now awake and peering curiously at his new sister, and realized that saving the ranch had been just the beginning. What they had built together was so much more valuable than land or money. They had built a family based on mutual respect, a partnership based on shared goals, and a love based on truly knowing and appreciating each other. Outside, the ranch continued its peaceful evening routine. The cattle settled down for the night, the horses moved quietly in their corrals, and the land that had brought Samuel and Elena together stretched out under the stars, waiting for whatever tomorrow would bring. It had been a marriage of necessity that became a partnership of choice, and finally a union of love. And as Elena had said when she first proposed their arrangement, sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places.